So anyway, how are you, Bryce? How are you going today?
Yeah, great, thanks. Just getting back into the swing of things, sort of second week back for us.
Oh, nice, nice. The time flies, doesn't it? So fast. Amazing.
It does, it really does.
But can you tell us a little bit about what consulting coordination do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess at a high level, we're sort of the industry certifier for the playground as an open space, which obviously in the context of early learning is all the yard outside, so everything outside the doors to the fences, effectively, from a standards compliance, risk management, as well as in some instances WHS as well to make sure the staff are safe as well. But primarily, it's focused on the children and the users.
Wow. And can I ask you, so it's primarily early learning, or do you cover all areas of playgrounds?
Yeah, good question. No, so we cover all of them. Everything from the early learning to the schools to local, state, federal government facilities, not just for play, but also for open space risk in general. So we also do everything from crime prevention through environmental design to traffic management in terms of car parks and things like that, vehicles running into the playgrounds or in the context of the early learning into the yards as well or into the buildings. So we
Wow.
sort of do, I guess, broad spectrum open space risk would be like a keyword, if you will.
Yeah. Now, can I ask you then, with early learning sector playgrounds, you're like the certifier. What would a service need from you, or what would they need to provide to you to get that certification? Do they come to you to plan their playground, or do they get a planner in first and then that's provided to you for sign off as a certifier?
I understand. So typically the process would start with design, whether that's a concept or whether the design's already been done. That would then be reviewed to make sure that whatever's being built is going to be compliant at the end. So you're not building something and spending resources, money, time, all those things to end up with something that you need to modify at the end. It's very easy to fix something on the plan. Very hard to have to dig something out of the ground once all the fences are up.
Yes.
So the typical process would be review of the design. And if it was a full process, it would be concept, say 80%, and then 100% so that the plans are stamped and certified. Whether that's just for risk or it's also for things like structural and civil engineering as well. Then from there, there'd be an inspection upon completion that covers off on the play standards and any other scope that we might have. So there could be civil or structural, something else in there as well. And that includes any testing of the softfall and things like that have gone in. And then that gives the service effectively the paperwork and the compliance for, one, their insurer, two, for the department. So they've got all the right paperwork. So when the department comes to either open the centre or sign off the upgrade or the renovation, you effectively have a clean slate, engineer signed piece of paper saying this is fine. And then from there, it also obviously provides, the safety and risk management for the kids as well once the centre's actually open.
Wow. And so CCEP then would obviously provide some ongoing support or checks and things like that to make sure that that playground is maintained to a satisfactory level?
Yeah, correct. So then moving on from there, I guess on a industry level, the centre would be doing their safety checks on a daily basis. Typically, their maintenance provider would be doing a monthly or quarterly check that would cover off things that can go on during the normal operation. And then once a year, you'd get someone like ourselves to come out and do a yearly audit, which then signs off the site for the year that follows, as well as making sure any maintenance that's occurred isn't throwing up issues, and giving you that, I guess, that clean slate for any department audits that might come through or any issues or injuries you might have on the site. It gives you the proper paperwork to ensure an accident remains an accident, so that you're not left in that space where, so here's all the things you're meant to do. Where's the paperwork? So you've done them, and then it gets very awkward very quickly if you don't have the paperwork.
Yes.
Having followed that process, apart from putting aside for the moment, make sure it's really safe for kids. from a legal perspective, having the right paperwork means it typically remains an accident. As soon as you don't have all the right paperwork, and this goes for all the other codes in the centre too, of course, whether it's your fire, electrics, test and tag, all that sort of jazz.
Right.
Not having the paperwork is immediately viewed as negligence. Whether you're doing the right thing or not, just missing the paperwork is a red flag, and then you have to start defending yourself. Whether you've done the right thing or not, missing the paperwork is really bad.
And
having
that
the paperwork in place, it's then, yes, this is an accident, and typically, that sort of case either disappears or goes to a minimal, like very minimal amount. It doesn't turn into a big saga, if you will.
Yes.
So that'd be the typical process. Yeah.
Right. And also with that, you mentioned codes. What is there a national code, state codes? What legislation or what policies are there that services must follow?
Yeah, great question. There's a bunch. I guess the most common ones in terms of the yards, particularly if we're talking playgrounds, would be AS 4685 as a series. So it has multiple parts. The parts relate to different equipment types and things like that. So that's the playground code in and of itself. And then you'd have AS 4422, so 4422, which governs the softball. So that's your artificial turf with the rubber pads underneath it, for example, or anything similar of that ilk. And then from there, it might also bleed into your codes for accessibility and things like that. And then, so that's sort of your overarching.
And that's your national ones.
Yeah. So those are your national Australian standards.
Yep.
And then it varies by state as to what the states might require. New South Wales has a really good guide. There's a couple of states that don't have a guide at all.
Right.
Well, not a current one, let's say.
Yeah.
So at least currently in a lot of instances, the New South Wales Department Guide is used as a benchmark because it's the most recent and also, I guess, the most comprehensive and has scoping details on things like fence heights, which almost everything else is silent on, for example. So I guess the trend in the industry to put the fences up to 1.8 metres high so the kids can't get out.
Yep.
The only place you'll find that written down is in the New South Wales Code.
Oh, wow.
The play code's silent on it because it's not really pertinent to a playground out in the field, and that's what that standard's designed for.
Right.
But at the same time, it's also, you'll find that detail is also used by all of your commercial pay-for-play places, whether that's like one of those places with the cafe and the playground in it, and you bring the kids there specifically to play, or it could be, a McDonald's or something similar. They all use 1.8.
Yep.
So that's where it actually came from originally. And I guess that's why it's found its way into that New South Wales Code.
Wow. Oh, that's really interesting. I didn't realise that, but I'm now thinking about it. McDonald's, the gates and the fences are really high. So,
and they have been for a long time, and they haven't had any incidences. It may well be that 1.7 is fine, but no one's going to question let's just stick with 1.8 and not shave off and see how we go. It's not a done thing.
Yeah.
In a typical sense, that'd be a good example. The 1.8 is the, I guess, new best practice. And I haven't seen a new service signed off where they've allowed a fence under that height in a very long time either.
Wow. And of course, this, there's a lot of information, a lot of codes, a lot of things for service and approved providers to follow. This is where they could reach out to CCEP as well and ask for support or help on their plans and their and the direction that they want to go in and whether or not whether it's a new playground, an existing playground and renovation, that's what you guys could help them with.
Yeah, absolutely. So effectively we're the industry's independent certifier. So we don't maintain, we don't sell any sort of equipment or anything like that. We purely do review, inspection and certification, and that's it. So it's very, very much independent review.
Which is what we need, of course.
Yeah,
with that. And look, do you think early learning service owners or approved providers are aware that playgrounds and services are governed by the National Code?
That's an excellent question.
National Construction Code. Sorry, Bryce.
Yes. So that they absolutely are. And it basically it pulls down a little bit further in the document where things that are permanently in the ground that aren't for habitation are typically classified as a Class 10B structure. And then basically under the guise of that, it requires cert. And following that line down, is there a certification for that type of item? Yes, there is. There's a playground code, and the playground code is 4685.
Right.
So that's sort of like the way that works, if that makes sense.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Right. So
yeah, it's definitely something where some providers and companies are very aware and others might not be. I just think probably at least at present, there's not enough information out there for people to make informed decisions.
Right. So really the sharing of more information and that those codes to the sector would be a benefit.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Otherwise, what can happen is you won't necessarily realise until you get to the pointy end of the stick where you've got a department audit and they're asking for paperwork.
And you don't have it.
You have an incident and you get a court subpoena asking for the certificates and the inspection reports exactly to these standards, and then it gets very awkward very quickly.
And do you see, and of course I'm sure you would see these cases, is there anything that particularly stands out to you where, anything where owners need to be aware of, what issues that they need to be aware of?
It's a good question. I think the first thing would be to make sure whatever suppliers you are using have the right insurances. So what I mean by that is typically when people engage a contractor of some form or other, they're looking at, do you have a specific dollar value of insurance?
And that's like your public liability and your accident and...
Yeah, correct. So it's your public liability, if it's a consultant, it'd be professional liability as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And if it's an equipment supplier, it would be products liability. But further down the page, or sometimes on the next page, depending on the insurance document, it actually has specifically what that insurance covers. So, for example, playgrounds or childcare is sort of almost like a dirty word for the insurers. How much like claims and things they get. So much like, I guess, adding a turbo to your car, the insurer wants to know. So someone, for example, that has landscape insurance, but it doesn't say playground in the actual backing document, their insurer won't cover them or won't necessarily cover them for them putting in a playground.
Wow, that's a really important tip.
Does that make sense? Because it's considered an asset class. If you're not disclosing that you're doing this high risk work, you're effectively not telling them what they need to know, and that wasn't part of the scope of the insurance. So
wow,
that's definitely something that that I guess center managers or facility managers do need to check, whether that's for inspection, for certification, for building, even maintenance of the playgrounds. Whoever they're using in terms of contractors needs to have that information in their insurance where it physically says playground inspection, playground certification, playground maintenance, etc. That is probably the first port of call to make sure what you're getting is right.
And do you see many people get caught out by that?
Yeah. It isn't uncommon for, and you see it a bit in the industry in open space where companies pop up and disappear. Like smaller companies, they'll pop up and disappear. So I guess the other thing on that would be longevity. If a company's been around for a long time and has held the same name for a long time too.
That's important.
Do like and not, I don't mean like changing from no PT Ltd to a PT Ltd, but physically actually brand new name every 3 or 4 years is not a good sign.
Right, because there's obviously red flags around that that something's happened. They've started again under another company.
Yeah, correct. I mean, the problem is that the industry doesn't have a proper watchdog in terms of the playgrounds. So it's still definitely buyer beware.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to ask you. Is there a watchdog? Is there a regulatory body that sort of says these, when you go to look for a licensed tradesperson, you can do that through fair trading and other things. Is there a body that says that you can Google or search for your provider that would show that they have that necessary insurance and are qualified to do early learning?
No, not at all. So it comes down to whoever's doing the purchasing to check to make sure that whoever's doing the works for you has the right insurances. If you're talking about play equipment specifically, it needs to have certificates of compliance signed by an engineer. Little caveat on that is, depending on the supplier of the equipment, it could well be a international engineer certifying to our code, which is perfectly fine.
Right.
So there are, for example, European manufacturers that have their equipment certified in Europe, and they're certified to our code, and that Australia honours their certifications, and they honour ours under an engineering agreement.
Right.
So there can be nothing wrong with that, but what you want to look for at the bottom of the page is the relevant standard, and that it says preferably chartered professional engineer.
Right. Okay.
If you're talking about certification for equipment.
Yeah. And if a service owner or a provider or a manager has a question or is thinking something's not right about the person I'm talking to, are they able to ring CCEP and say, look, this is the person we're talking to. We haven't signed a contract yet, but have you had dealings with them in the past? Is that something that a service could do?
Yeah, absolutely. It wouldn't be uncommon for people to give us a quick call and ask exactly that.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. Do you see also any issues, I suppose, in greater terms or where maybe it's lack of knowledge or lack of access to landscapers that are, that meet those qualifications in remote areas?
Yeah, absolutely. And availability can definitely be an issue. It can be gotten around though by engaging a certification company, whether that's us or someone else,
right,
to oversight the entire process.
Oh, okay. So they've got someone in their local community that isn't necessary, that they still have to make sure they've got the right insurance.
Yeah. So the insurance, for example, it may well be that their insurance covers them for landscaping, but if having one of the certification companies oversight it would mean that from their insurer's point of view, they don't care about the play bit because someone else's paperwork is 100% covering them categorically.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a great benefit.
For example, if there's an issue with the play, it would fall on the certification company to deal with that part of the claim.
Right.
And then it just goes back to, for example, unless the landscaper has put the wrong concrete in or something like physical fabrication issues.
Yep.
Would be the responsibility of that company.
Yep.
But from a play point of view, it would be can be covered by the certification company.
And that's okay, because that's what I was thinking, in remote areas or where there's lack of everyone's obviously experiencing staff shortages, let alone out in remote areas where that would help resolve that. So that's something else that services who are finding it hard to get a qualified or someone that meets those standards, they could actually contact you as well and ask for help in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes everything from signing it off at the end to even having a briefing call with whoever might be doing the works to say, these are the things you need to be careful of. Let's jump on a video call or something like that and walk me around the site. For example, it wouldn't be unusual for us to do that for regional areas at all.
Wow. Oh, that's fantastic, because I think there's some people in our audience are trying to find out what they're doing, and they're looking at maybe upgrading or building. So to be able to access your team's knowledge and expertise would be a major benefit for them. Now, you've worked with, obviously, a lot of services, and not only obviously in the early learning sector, schools and things like that. Are you seeing any particular trends happening?
Good question. I'd say there's a lot more trends towards unstructured play, and in a small way towards more of your nature play and those sorts of things. But also there's a growing trend that's really quite good to see, in that when we go out to inspect services, there's a lot less wrong. if that makes sense. So, like obviously we've been doing this for over 35 years, and originally when you started doing it, there was no I guess very little understanding of what needed to be done. So a inspection would yield a lot of things that need fixing. I guess one of the trends that has been happening is as there's more education out there, and as some of these, I guess, centres and larger brands as well are going along that journey of, we want to maintain certain standards of compliance and safety and all those things. We're finding there's a lot less and in some cases, nothing wrong with the centre at all.
Yep.
Which is really, really quite nice to see. It's definitely like a market improvement, I'd say, over the last 5 or 6 years in terms of everything from maintaining things so there's no sharps to, removal of electrical hazards. I guess one of the big ones is obviously egress risks as well, where the kids can clamber up and out. And
yes.
we're seeing a lot more mitigation of that as well, which is really, really good.
Well, and is there any discussion around like neurodiverse children and tactile environment as well? Is that where we move into that more natural play, maybe?
It certainly can be. It's probably more an architect area than ours. But certainly we certainly are seeing a lot more where you're having either more interactive elements or more things where the kids are actually creating those environments themselves within a framework of either a baseline of equipment that they add things to or in a supervised manner with the staff as well, obviously, because you don't want them building a bridge out of the centre.
Wow.
It's very much a supervision thing.
A lot's changed in 35 years.
Built equipment and a lot more custom environments.
Yes, and also a lot's changed in those 35 years from a slippery dip and a swing and maybe a trampoline to very a diverse range of play areas that incorporate obviously environment and things like that now, which is fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess just going back to something you were saying before about things for centres to be aware of, one of those would be where you have the movable equipment, making sure that the staff know where they're placing it and how much space it needs around, which the manufacturers do provide, and just making sure that it's not placed, right on the concrete path and things like that. One of the most common things we see when we go look at a centre is things that have been placed against the fence, so the kids can just clamber out, number one. And then number two would be where movable equipment has been placed too close to paths, rocks, fencing, all those sorts of things, or where perhaps the staff don't know where the soft fall or the soft surfacing that you can fall on starts and ends, because it's all underneath the artificial grass typically.
Yes.
But not all of the artificial grass has that impact under it, depending on the centre.
Yes.
So then you'll have it where it's been set up, and from aesthetically, it looks like it has enough room around it, but in reality, it's far too close to the hard surface that still looks like artificial grass but can't take a hit.
Yeah. It's so reminiscing about the days gone by when I grew up and had the spinning thing that everyone hung on to. It's got flung off onto the hardest ground you could ever imagine. It's like the nice soft fall now makes it so much easier to have a bit of fun without being damaged.
It does. Obviously, that said, the play standards are focused on preventing serious injury, death, or disability.
Yeah.
So, it's not really concerned with bumps and scrapes and that sort of thing. It's not meant to wrap the kids in cotton wool.
Yes.
It's meant to prevent serious injury, death, or disability.
Yeah, and that's very important. Because kids obviously need to, most kids, we can't wrap them up in cotton wool, like you said. They will scrape and hurt themselves at various points in their life, whether they're in care or at home or out in whatever you're doing. So yes, I know that to make sure it's safe from that serious injury and death and disablement, like you said, is so important. Can I ask you? You mentioned artificial grass. Now,
yes.
With that, there's obviously that can get hot as well. What Is there checks that the services must do to check the temperature, especially in hotter climates? In northern Queensland and things like that, or even Sydney, some days. But is there ways that they must check those temperatures of that grass?
It's an excellent question.
Sorry to throw you in there, Bryce.
No, that's okay. That's okay. To the best of my knowledge, it's not a must in any Aussie standard per se.
Right. Okay.
In a specific line item.
Right. Yes.
Gotcha. The department doesn't require it.
Yep.
And it wouldn't be uncommon to see in centres where they actually have the heat sensor.
Yep.
And they'll check the temp and make sure that it's okay for the kids to go out.
Right. So it's common sense and also possibly centre policy and procedure that they build into that.
Yeah. I believe the department has some documentation on it as well, but you won't find it, for example, in the play code.
Yeah, no, that's all right. So it might be as when it gets.
It varies environmentally as well. So
yes,
if the outside temp is 15, it doesn't matter how sunny it is. It's never going to get too hot.
No.
But then you apply that same situation in Northern Territory, and you're burning your feet while standing inside.
Yes.
So it really, it's definitely, I guess, situationally dependent.
But that would make sense.
See centres with the heat check to make sure that it is okay to go out and play. It usually lines up with the UV rating anyway, as well. So when you're getting the higher UV, you're getting the higher heat.
Yes.
You're not going to be out there because the UV is too high anyway.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. So thank you for sharing that. I won't hold you to that, though. It was just a quick discussion about, because I know I've stood on artificial grass where it's like been a hot day. I'm like, oh my God, that's so hot. But
no, it can get quite hot. But obviously there's a lot of benefits to having it as well. So it's definitely the one of the cons, but there's a lot of pros for it.
Absolutely. Oh, less mowing. It's fantastic. Maintenance. Yes. Hey, what I was going to ask you, if a service wants to work on their playground, how can they be best prepared to start that process?
In terms of, say, renovating it or something like that?
Renovating, So they've got something, a playground that's, 15 years old, say, or a new owner's coming in and wanting to apply their own theories on it, or, their own practices around that playground and their own ideas. What steps would they need to take to do that work, or what would you recommend they do?
Yeah, great question. So to start at the very start, they should look at the last annual audit they've had done by whichever inspection company they use. And that will typically include a review of any issues that the site has. And it should also include any testing of the softball as well. And then from there, you can work out what things you can retain, what things you need to replace. It may well be that the actual impact surface tests just fine, for example, but the new owner or the person doing the upgrade doesn't want it to look like the rubber granules anymore, and they want it to look like turf. So then from that inspection that you've had previously, or perhaps even getting one specifically pre-upgrade, you can retain it and just put artificial grass over it, which visually changes it for the stakeholders.
Yes.
But it doesn't cost you an arm and a leg to replace something that's still fine. Then from there, depending on what sort of service it is, it would go to a design team or an architect or a playground company, depending how big or small it is, to design that upgrade. And then at that point, while you're doing that, either the provider themselves would arrange for a certifier to look at things as it goes along.
So you guys come into it?
Correct. Or the service or the centre could engage one of the certification companies themselves to oversight it all the way along the process.
Oh, wow. Okay, so and I know we probably sort of touched on it earlier as well, but just to sort of quantify those steps is fantastic. And effectively, once again, they can reach out to CCEP and ask these questions and get that expert knowledge that's required to make sure their ideas and their plans meet those standards.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we spoke about it offline the other day. I'm happy to send you through a bit of a, I guess, generic advisory on the same that you can share with
That would be fantastic. Yeah, that would be fantastic, and we can include it, a link or something to share out to our audience as well. No, that would be brilliant. And of course, any information you provide us, we'll share as part of the podcast as well, Bryce.
Yeah, happy to do so.
Fantastic. Now, looking forward, what do you think the big topics are for the early learning sector over the next sort of, I suppose 1 year to 5 years?
Good question. I think there's a lot of movement to, I guess, in terms of doing upgrades and things like that, because a lot of our infrastructure and a lot of the Australian suburbs are the same. Everything was built in a big boom in the 80s.
Yes.
So things are now starting to look a little bit long in the tooth, and there's a lot of movement to doing upgrades and things like that. So I guess as a trend, the aesthetic quality and the safety quality of centres is going up and going up markedly. I think there's a trend towards more natural play, but a high quality natural play.
Yes.
And then also too, I've seen a little bit of this come through where the centre staff and even the kids are involved in the process of actually what they want outside, rather than it being a cookie cutter drop in. So the trend seems to be going to each centre is becoming more unique.
Wow.
In what they have outside.
Yeah. Which is great. So
deck, slide, artificial grass, it's flat. That's it. You can ride little bikes around. Done. It's becoming very much sort of more bespoke and tailored side by side, even for those services where it is a large, it's a large group of services. It's becoming more and more bespoke on that basis.
Yeah. And so you mentioned about staff and child involvement. And of course, that's all part of, the National Quality Framework, all of that engagement. So not only does it help build a playground that the centre sees necessary for their children or relevant to the children that are there, but also helps that centre work towards that rating or that National Quality Framework expectation.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's sort of a continuation of a trend of local government as well, where they're getting in architects more and more or landscape architects to design these spaces. And then inherently, as part of that process, the landscape architects do a collaborative approach with the client or with the users of the space.
Yeah.
So it's as much about actually engaging someone to design the space for you as it is about getting that input, because that's an inherent part of the process for those guys.
Yeah, and I suppose for the way they they that with children is through drawings and like a child survey, and talking, in a group about what they enjoy to play in, and then the staff observations around that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Look, Bryce, before we finish up, we love to ask all of our guests on our podcast for a personal motto or I actually call it wise words. I love my little wise words. Okay. Do you have one you'd like to share with us today?
Yeah, sure. Doing something hard is just as time-consuming and difficult as doing something easy.
Yes, that's fantastic. Actually, yeah. It's very true.
Yeah, it's very much sort of a mantra that I live by. The hard things, it takes the same time, same effort to do something hard as to do something easy. And hard is almost always better.
Yeah. Well, funnily enough, quite often the easy way, you're actually trying to think of ways to do an easy way, which takes up the same amount of time if you just did it the right way to start with, or the harder way anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think it's the first thing you think of is, how do I do this easy? And it never works out easy.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, all right. Look, thank you so much for your time today. I've actually enjoyed learning more about playground and the process to make a wonderful play area, whether it be natural or free play, for our early learning sector providers. And like I said, we'll share all your details and information with the podcast. And thank you very much for your time.
No problem at all, Paula. Have a great day.